You're listening to Drug Positive, the Risk Reduction and Benefit Enhancement podcast. Well, hello, and welcome to the first episode of Drug Positive. I'm Emanuel Sferios, a drug educator and harm reduction advocate. I founded Dance Safe, and it's about time I started a podcast.
I'm co-host Tatiana Makofkin. I'm married to Emanuel.
And you are an artist extraordinaire. We're hoping to show some of your art in the video versions that we produce. And this, our first episode, is a video version. So you can actually watch this on YouTube, the Drug Positive YouTube channel. I don't know how many we're going to end up being able to videotape. It's a lot more time and expense, but we also wanted to have some up there. So this first podcast, we interviewed Amy Povah, who is a personal hero of mine. She's the founder of the CANDO Clemency project. CANDO stands for Clemency for All Nonviolent Drug Offenders. And she has this distinction of being the person who has been given the longest prison sentence for an MDMA-related crime ever. She was sentenced to 24 years in prison on conspiracy charges. Her husband was actually the dealer, but she refused to cooperate. And so while her husband got only 3 months probation, she got 24 years. And she was released. She was granted clemency by Bill Clinton in 2003, and then founded this nonprofit to get other nonviolent drug offenders freed from prison. What did you think of it?
Well, it's very moving to hear Amy describe this experience that she's had. What I really was moved by was her personal integrity and the clarity with which she sees the choices that are before her at any given moment. When she was pressured to snitch on people, give information, I mean, she didn't even have that much to give. But even if she had, whether she did or didn't was immaterial, because she was not going to go there. She was clear, absolutely, that it's...
That's at one point she broke down crying. You'll see in the interview where everyone in her life, she said, was pressuring her to just cave in and become...
Wear a wire and all
become
this.
A confidential informant, and she refused to do it. Her mother, her lawyer, everyone was saying... Even one of the prosecutors told her, you know, we really don't want to be doing this to you. Why don't you save yourself? And she had so much integrity.
So manipulative,
Yeah, she just refused to do that.
She keeps referring to her soul.
Yeah.
And it's just her vision is to see the goodness and go towards it.
And she's really, really nonpartisan. I love that about her. There's a part in the interview where she talks about working with the Trump administration. Many people don't know, but she was instrumental in getting Alice Johnson released, the grandmother, nonviolent drug prisoner who Kim Kardashian met with. And of course, Kim Kardashian gets all of the, media around it. But it was Amy and the CANDO Clemency project that actually did all the behind the scenes work. So when many people were saying to her, oh, you'll never get Donald Trump to release anyone, blah, 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 she refused to believe that, and
well, it's her life's work.
Right.
Just keep pushing forward, whatever the conditions may be. She worked hard during the Obama administration, and she's still working hard now. And getting more done.
She said in the interview that she thinks Donald Trump's going to release more people than even Obama, who released over 1,700 people in his last term. She's very hopeful about that. What do you think? I'm a little skeptical he's actually going to do it, but
what she seems to be saying is that she's in conversation with people. They're still interested, and so she feels hopeful because she still feels a sense of energy and engagement and involvement. So I can't really comment on that. I have no idea. To me, like, who can say what this man will do that's in charge? But I applaud it if he decides that releasing people is part of his program. Great.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Why don't we get straight to the interview?
All right.
Welcome to the inaugural edition of Drug Positive. We're videotaping today's episode. I'm here with Amy Povah, who holds a special place in my heart because when I started Dance Safe in 1998, we brought your Clemency campaign postcards out to the table and had all of our chapters around the country bring them out. Amy has the distinction, if I'm correct, of being the person given the longest prison sentence for an MDMA-related crime of anyone in history. She was sentenced to 24 years and served 9 of those years.
Correct.
And there was a clemency campaign to Bill Clinton to grant her clemency. And we spread the word for you in the early days. I'm really happy to be with you here doing this first podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, as far as I know, there may be somebody who has a longer sentence, but I have not heard of them. So I probably shouldn't claim that as a fact. But, you know, it was the community, the psychedelic community that really, and the cannabis community that seemed to come to my aid the most. Mm-hmm. And just through word of mouth and hearing about my case. Fairly quickly, I reached out to somebody, wrote a letter to her. She became an advocate. Her name was Virginia Resner. And then Mickey Norris and Chris Conrad got on board. And they're the ones who did the postcards that you had.
Yeah, I knew Chris back in the day. Yeah,
they did the postcards for me. They put me on the cover of Shattered Lives. They were doing rallies and in San Francisco and had our posters and had an exhibit called HR 95 that traveled the nation. And they were really pioneers because nobody, you know, that's when we were in the tough on crime era, that whole from 88 to all through the 90s. And people really kind of, you know, didn't want to be associated with anybody who had gotten a drug case. The media was like, well, we don't want to look soft on crime. My mother would write to media sources and nobody was interested. So it was really their hard work. And then some victims, people who had maybe been victims of incest or some kind of trauma and had found that MDMA was beneficial to them, started finding me and would come and visit me. Right. Oh. So I got a lot of love from the community.
That's great. Yeah, so if you don't know, Amy was convicted under conspiracy charges, and she got involved with one of the early MDMA dealers in the country, and who in fact got his start through Michael Clegg, who was the first person to start selling MDMA legally, back when it was still legal, recreationally in nightclubs. And so if you're not familiar with conspiracy charges, it's where they can tack long prison sentences onto you even if you weren't deeply involved in the illegal activity. And when I first spoke to you on the phone, you told me this story about why it was you decided not to cooperate with the feds when you got arrested. I'd love for you to tell that again.
Right. Well, I had heard about ecstasy. You know, there were like little rumors and, you know, have you tried this stuff? Have you? And
what year was that?
This was in 84.
Okay. Still legal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it was March of 84. And, right, well, I don't think anybody even knew really what it was. It just, you know, so it was just a rumor that was going around. And so somebody asked me if I wanted to do some. At first I said no, because I was just thinking Quaalude, and I'd had a bad experience on a Quaalude once before, so I was just like, no, I said, and then they were like, no, this is different. You know, you've got to try this. It's, you know, it'll make you feel all, you know, tingly inside and stuff, and it still sort of sounded woo-woo, and I'm just like, I don't know.
Did they call it a psychedelic? Were you introduced? No, okay. Interesting.
No. And so I took one, and it wasn't long before, well, maybe about 45 minutes or so, where I was just like, I was like, I've got to get outside. And I had a full-on spiritual awakening. I was pacing, putting my feet one in front of the other. And I kept, I was like rubbing myself saying, I love myself. And that just wasn't something that I ever did. I wasn't, in fact, I had never even been introduced to metaphysics or any of that philosophy until later. And I remember my head rolling back, and there was a full moon, and the moon was it just seemed like it was communicating with me. And so
that happens to a lot of people. You don't have to laugh about that.
I know. I just know people are going to be like, woo woo, but unless you've been there. So I went home and I went to the bathroom because I knew I needed to look in the mirror. And then when I looked in the mirror, my pupils were dilated, and it was just a very profound experience, because I was saying, I'm looking into the universe, and I, oddly enough, wanted in that moment to do this particular drug with my mother. And I would never want to do any drug with my mother, but I had this feeling in my soul that it would be nice to communicate on the level that I feel you can communicate on with MDMA, with somebody you love, and where there may be, some.
Did you ever get a chance to do that?
No. Oh. No, she's not somebody who would take something like that, take ecstasy.
I had the opportunity.
Did you?
Yeah.
Wow.
But there was a profound realization you had that you said ultimately led to your decision not to cooperate with the feds.
Yeah, there's a correlation because that evening set me on my path, the path that I'm still on today. Because that was the night that I met Amy Povah. That was the night that I had a full-on spiritual awakening. And so this whole journey started with something very beautiful. And stuff like that, I don't question it. It's not something that, I try to analyze. I just know that it was pure. I was tapping into empathy and a feeling of never wanting to harm another soul on the planet. And that if other people could tap into this feeling, we maybe could solve some problems and have less conflict and war. So I ultimately received a phone call from Sandy. We went out on a date, and I decided to tell him about my experience. And he knew a lot about ecstasy. I didn't even know that he knew anything about it. Because he was a businessman, suit and tie, ran several companies, and he knew all about it. And so he started talking about its beneficial properties, and I've done some research, and I'm just sitting there going, really? Wow. And then that same evening, he asked me if I wanted to do some. And I thought it was too soon, because I'm still processing, and I didn't know him that well. And I begged off. And he took a half, and that kind of, I don't know, I didn't think that, I thought that was a little bit inappropriate, because I felt like I had declined, and he went ahead and took half. But my defenses went down, because he was first of all, I really thought he was kind of a fascinating person. Stanford Law School graduate. He'd also gone to Princeton theology school. So I kind of loosened up, and I was just like, okay, well, because he had said, if you take half, he goes, it'll be a much milder version of what you experienced. And I think I remember putting my hand to in the middle of the table, and I said, okay. I said, I'll do half.
One of the major pieces of harm reduction advice we give to MDMA users is not to make major relationship decisions while under the influence of the drug. So it is very easy to fall in love with people around you when you're on MDMA, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're a good person for you to be with long term.
I think there were some bumper stickers that said something similar for a while that I was seeing in the Dallas area, like wait a month after X or something. So we fell in love that night. We really did. We bonded. And so we went on a journey, got married 8 months later. But
did you know it when you married him that he was selling ecstasy?
I think he was just setting up the structure about that same time.
But MDMA was still legal.
It was legal
at that time. Yeah. Okay. So
it was absolutely legal, and I only heard him reference Michael Clegg once, and because he really was trying to shield a lot of that from me. I think that's why I never met Michael Clegg. I've never met him in my life, but when I asked him how he's never smoked pot. He had a problem with alcohol, but he's not a drug person and never has been. And I said, well, how is it that you took ecstasy? And he said 2 of his friends took him hostage for his 40th birthday. I think it was his 40th birthday, and insisted that he try it. And he did not want to. And I mean, he kind of dug in and he's like, no, he goes, I don't do drugs. And they pushed it. And I think one of the women was Pauline Clegg, Michael Clegg's wife.
Oh, okay.
And so I heard Michael Clegg's name referenced. And then after that, he never really referenced them again. My marriage to Sandy was pretty rocky. He wasn't faithful, and he had a drinking problem that was kind of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type thing. A totally different personality would come out. We called him Weird Harold. So I only lasted about 3 years with him. And then after several times trying to break up with him, I finally realized I can't keep doing this broken record where he would beg me to stay in. I'm going to change and everything like that. So I moved to Los Angeles. So he was arrested in Germany a year after I moved out here, but we were on friendly terms. I still cared for him because he's really the first person I ever fell in love with. And I regret some of the decisions that I made, but after he was arrested, I went to his aid, and I went and retained an attorney, flew over to Germany and met with him. Big mistake, although I did it from a good place. So it's sad to be crushed by your virtues, but I didn't know about the conspiracy law, which means if you do one overt act, if you move the conspiracy one step forward, you're guilty for everything in it, even the blind stuff that activity that from people you didn't know. So I went around and collected some money, and it wasn't all kosher. And even when I was doing it, there was one time where I met with this guy in a hotel room, and I was just like, I am not doing this again. It was just too weird for me. And
raising money for Sandy's defense.
Yeah, for his bail and attorneys and stuff. But what I didn't know is he was moving money from Zurich into Germany, and he had other foot soldiers. I just wish he hadn't pulled me in. So when the feds busted into my home up above Sunset in the Hollywood Hills, first of all, I drove into my garage, and they had already been ransacking. And so they rushed my car with guns. This was before the whole SWAT era. So they were in cowboy boots and cowboy hats from Texas. And at first I thought I was being robbed or something. And a lot of screaming, and the whole don't move, put your hands up, which is dangerously contradictory.
Yeah, right.
I remember that. And they kind of flanked me and took me into the house, threw me in the hot seat, the proverbial hot seat. My house was just stuff in the floor, things were broken, the kitchen was crazy. And so you're dealing with this stimulus. My front door was not there. That's a bizarre thing when there's just a hole in your house because the front door was on the floor. And you're just trying, I'm trying to process. And the only way to process this kind of shock and awe for me, was to just kind of shut down, was to just, I just had to look at my feet and keep focused down because I was just trying to, you're just processing way too much stimulus and the screaming, and you're in hot water. And then they did the good guy, bad guy routine. So very quickly, somebody moved in who tried to befriend me and tell me that we're your friends.
Right.
From that moment, it was very clear to me, as soon as they started talking to me, as soon as they were saying, we're your friends, And my friends were destroying my home. My friends were, I mean, you could, the stuff going on in the kitchen, the loud noises, the dishes breaking, my contents of my refrigerator in the floor. I had evil in my home. That's the only way I know how to explain it. I was literally surrounded by evil. This was my home. This was my nest. And watching people laugh, it's just not even professional like they do with crime scene when it's a murder, where they just do their job. This was cackling.
Well, this is one of the great ironies of the drug war, right? It splits us into these artificial good guys and bad guys, where the good guys, you know, the DEA and the prosecutors, believe that they're on this side of righteousness, and such great evil can come from that. It reminds me of the phrase, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," almost like the crimes that come out of cults. When you are such a true believer in your cause, you know, we're stamping out these evil drugs, we're protecting the children. You can, you know, do great harms, and then that's what's happening every day now in this country still.
Exactly.
And you got a firsthand taste of that.
Well, I wanted to make a phone call, and I remember they denied me that right, because that's sort of ingrained that you have that right, and they said no, and I just knew that whatever this was, I didn't want to be associated with it. I didn't want to communicate with any entity that acted this way. And a friend of mine who had been at a meeting that I had been to earlier pulled in behind me. And I guess they had been grilling her outside, and they had told her she could leave. So she came in, God bless her, and she was just like, "Is there anything you want me to do?" Because she was leaving. And I had retained an attorney on a small retainer fee, thinking somebody would come and one day and just want to ask me questions. And so I said, "Would you please call?" And I gave the name of the attorney. And so he came up.
That same day? Yeah,
he came up. I didn't know that there were 2 prosecutors there at the time, but he asked some questions, and so they singled themselves out, talked to him, and he said, "Come on, Amy, we're free to leave." So he took me, we went to a small cafe, and he started explaining to me the conspiracy law and the situation, and they want your cooperation. And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Well, you know, they're probably going to want you to become a working informant. You're a valuable asset." And I was like, at that point, there weren't even, I don't think, the body of movies and the body of language back then. This was 89. So I was just like, "What does that mean?" And he goes, "You're looking at 20 to life, and they can indict you for conspiracy." So I knew right then, I'm just not going to do this, because he said, "You may have to wear a wire, you have to dance the dance. You don't get to make the rules, they do. And once you start playing that game, you do what they say."
You were just told you're facing 20 to life, and yet you knew immediately you weren't going to cooperate.
I wasn't going to do it.
How did you feel when he told you you're facing 20 to life?
I didn't believe it at first.
You didn't believe it?
I didn't believe it.
Like they could never do that?
Yeah, it's like, this is America.
That doesn't happen in America. Come on.
And I'm like, I'm a good person. I've never been in trouble. I just kind of felt like...
But did you refuse to cooperate because you were concerned about your safety if you happened to wear a wire?
I don't think that was a factor. I just felt like, well, my soul isn't for sale. I'm not going to sell my soul, and but they don't care. They break you down. They start alienating you from your friends, from the people you work with, because they go visit them and say, "Why are you associating with somebody who's at the center of a big drug deal?" So the more they started doing that to me, the more I dug in. Because I saw, like, okay, I see, you know, to me, this is literally evil, because they were pressuring other people and saying, they found a little glitch in somebody's taxes, and he had to hire an attorney. And the attorney met with the prosecutor and said, "What do you want from my client?" He said, "We want him to say that Amy's selling ecstasy, because we know she is. And we just want the truth." They always say the truth. But it wasn't true. I wasn't selling ecstasy. And fortunately, nobody said that I was. They could have lied and said, okay, just make this go away. But, and when I saw how they were squeezing my friends and people I worked with, and they were having to hire attorneys at $20,000 a pop or $10,000 a pop, I was just like, I don't care if they put a gun to my head. I am not going to do this. I was shipped to Waco, Texas, which is where the trial was. Couldn't get lower on the totem pole of life than the Waco County Jail. So I was in that Waco County Jail for a year waiting for trial. And even that was another phase of harassment.
Yeah,
so
right.
I had chicken pox.
Were they still pressuring you to cooperate at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In fact, there were some very unorthodox things going on there. You can't ever allow a DEA agent or somebody associated with the case to have access to someone who has an attorney. And I got chickenpox while I was there. They put me in a quarantine room downstairs, and one day my door popped open and the prison guard let one of the guys who had been at my original raid step into my cell. And he said, he was just shaking his head. He goes, why won't you save yourself? He goes, we don't want to prosecute you. You know that. And he goes, why won't you save yourself? And I was just covered in chickenpox sores. I can't even imagine. And I just remember just kind of groaning. So I went to trial and I was convicted. I knew, even when I was in the county jail, I was trying to tell my parents, and they were pressuring me. My attorney that was assigned to me, because by now I don't have any money, they've seized everything, he's trying to pressure me. And I was all alone. I didn't have one person, not one, on my side.
You are a hero, Amy. Look at you now. Look what you've done. Like, we haven't even told the audience yet about the nonprofit you founded and the people you're releasing from prison.
It's just a very lonely path for people who know their soul. Mm-hmm. And I didn't care. As far as I was concerned, just kill me, because my relationship with my soul is more important to me than monetary gain or temporary comfort. And so I'm sorry. It just brings back so much, because I love my parents dearly, but they were being pressured by my own attorney. And I would get on the phone and then we would start hollering at each other. My mom was like, why won't you just cooperate? And I said, you don't understand. Cooperation doesn't mean saying what I did. I've already said what I did. I'm willing to admit what I did. I have to testify against other people, or you don't get the benefit of a plea. And I'm not going to do it. There was one person I could have provided some information on that after Sandy's arrest helped me with, some of the collecting of the money, and he found some ecstasy. He sold it. He was already involved with Sandy, and he got me that money, and they wanted me to testify against him. And believe me, there was no love between us. He testified against me. And they were even saying, he's ratting you out. They do that thing. And I said, I don't care. I was just like, I don't care. Just do whatever you got to do to me. I don't care. I had a wonderful life. So I gave up all of that. Ecstasy put me on this journey. It put me on this path. It was a beautiful experience. And I'm here because of it. And so I thought, whatever God has in plan, I'm where I'm supposed to be. So, sorry, I got to pull it together. So I just felt like, God has me on this. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to come through it. I don't know how, but I'm going to come through it. I'm going to be okay. And we just have to have faith. And my parents, who go to church every Sunday, I would be like, where's your faith?
Did that work? Did it work on them?
Sometimes, not.
Did they survive your release? Were they there when you? Oh,
yeah,
good.
In fact, I'm going to see them
soon.
They're
Great.
I'm traveling to see him. My dad's not doing so well.
So I want to take this time to remind people that you're listening to Drug Positive. This is episode 1, and we're speaking to Amy Povah, the founder of the CANDO Clemency project at CandoClemency.com. We had a technical issue towards the end with Amy's lavalier microphone, so we do want to apologize for the sound quality. It's a bit echoey. We are figuring out this process. And anyway, we chatted at this point for a while about her work, and we're going to pick up the interview now where she's describing the Office of Pardon Attorneys. Check this out. This is really interesting. I think you'll like this.
DOJ controls Office of the Pardon Attorney, and they want everyone to think that there aren't any good cases.
Let me say this in my words, because I just learned this today from you, and I think the audience would be really interested in understanding how this works. There is an Office of Pardon Attorneys that is a part of the DOJ, the Department of Justice, whose job is to review clemency cases. That means however they discover them, people are saying, hey, this person doesn't really deserve what's happening. And the most deserving cases, they're supposed to forward to the White House and recommend a pardon. But because the POA is staffed mostly by prosecutors that are infected by this evil that comes with the drug war, they don't want people to think that they're putting away innocent people. And so they bury the most innocent of the convicted nonviolent drug offenders. And instead, even, you told me, they send over recommendations for people that, in fact, are very likely to commit more crimes in order to send a message to the American public that, look what happens when you get soft on crime, blah, blah, blah. Is that really what happens?
It's a variety. We monitored this very closely, the CANDO Foundation, other people who are clemency experts, and we started ringing the bell early on because we started seeing absolutely perfect candidates being denied. Alice Johnson was at the top of my CANDO top 25 women who deserve clemency, and I just started seeing elderly women, first offenders, people who had already served 10, 15, 20 years, no incident reports. In fact, they had, some of them had earned degrees while they were in prison, and denied. Pot lifers, paraplegic, serving life for pot, first offenders, denied. And we knew for a fact some were making it over to the White House that had over 100 incident reports while she was in prison. We knew that one guy got it who had assaulted a guard. So I'm not saying that that's always what they do. I'm saying that presidents can't trust the Department of Justice to do right by them because it's a conflict of interest. And I don't think they like releasing the people that they put away. And some people were criticizing Trump because he was listening to celebrities, but we were very hands-on with that. We're glad Kim wasn't an expert because a lot of the experts that I work with, they said to me, Trump will never do it. It's never, it's not going to happen. That's not where his head is. Mm-hmm. And because she wasn't an expert, she was like, I'm going to help this woman. She took it in.
Well, let's talk a bit about Alice Johnson because this is pretty current. She was just released a week or two ago, right? Mm-hmm. I first heard about it on Democracy Now! And of course, the mainstream media has been emphasizing the role of Kim Kardashian in this. And so I actually, when I emailed you, when I heard about it, said, hey, do you know about this? And you were like, what? I'm in the thick of it. So why don't you tell our listeners sort of the real story? How did Alice Johnson get released? And how did Kim Kardashian get involved?
Well, in 2014, I wrote to Alice because I had been asked to create the top 25 women by Dennis Kashan, who used to work at USA Today. And he knew that I only dealt in women. I later expanded it to men, but at the time, I just focused on women because of my own personal experience and all the women that I'd served time with. I put Alice at the top, even over friends that I served time with. Josephine Ledesma was serving life. First offender, Danielle Metz, and they are very dear to my heart, and I wanted them out. But I put Alice at the top.
How did you decide who was first deserving, who was second deserving? That must have
been... It was hard.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I went by how many years they had already served. I put the lifers first because I felt like we've got to get the lifers out. And Obama gave an indication early on in his first batch that he was releasing lifers. So I put lifers first. I kind of looked at how many years they had served, but I needed to look at what they had done while they were in prison. Alice stood out because she was a playwright, and the warden, which is very rare, was supporting her clemency. She just popped for me because one of the things she said was, society, you don't know what you're missing. I have so much life in me. And she just is very bubbly and infectious.
I saw the video when she got out of the car and she ran across the street to her family. It was brought tears to my eyes. Yeah.
And so it was very deflating and even insulting to me when almost every single person came off my list except for her. And I was just like, God, was that a curse or something? I mean, I'm just like, why is she not? And then every list that came out with Obama, at first Alice would cry a bucket of tears. She just knew, she was always so positive. I know I'm going to be on the next list. I know I'm going to be on the next list. And she wasn't. And then she would cry and cry. And then after a while, she's like, I'm not going to do this to myself. I've got to disconnect. But she stayed hopeful. And by the time Obama left office and she had been denied, she had gone through such a metamorphosis that instead of crying and being upset, she was just like, I'm fine with this. I know God has me. I'm still going to get it. I know God has a plan. So Topeka Sam is the hero. Topeka Sam, who I work with and talk to almost every single day, she connected her with Mike. And the Mike video op-ed, thanks to Topeka Sam connecting Mike with her, Jake Horowitz and Kendall was his assistant. They put together this video op-ed that caught Kim's eye. Kim saw it on social media. Oh, okay. She retweeted it, but then she reached out to her attorney, Sean Hawley, and Sean Hawley Googled and found my organization and called me and said, we want to be in touch. First, she said, I'm representing a celebrity. She said, I don't know if I can share the name. Maybe later I'll be able to. But first, they just wanted to be in touch with Alice. So I put them in touch with Alice, and then kind of fairly quickly, we learned it was Kim. And then there was a team that was assembled. Jennifer Turner, who was on Democracy Now! Yes. That you just referenced.
I just reviewed her, the show today before I came here. So,
right.
Yeah.
Brittany Bird, who's an amazing person who has who has filed clemency, and I think she has like something like 7 or 8 people that she was their attorney during the Obama administration who got clemency. She's phenomenal. And myself and Sean. So fairly quickly, we started strategizing. And I got a phone call one day. I can now say it was Sean Hopwood. He was a Georgetown law professor. And the White House had reached out to him inquiring about Alice's case. I guess they had seen the video go viral.
Because Trump spends a lot of time on social media.
I don't think it was Trump, but I think somebody in the White House was intrigued. And they were shaping prison reform because Jared Kushner is now involved in prison reform. Sean's take on it was that they were looking for a case to spotlight to get maybe people in the Trump administration who were resistant and were not on board with it. So because I said, why is the White House interested? And he goes, I don't know. This is probably why. It's probably not clemency, because of course I was like, and he said, don't tell anyone. And so I was like, I have to make an executive decision here. So I did tell. I told Sean Hawley and Jennifer Turner that the White House is aware of Alice's case, and we factored that in, and the decision was made that Kim should reach into the White House. And she reached into Ivanka. And then the rest is kind of, it took 7 months, and there was a lot of this. But
and Kim Kardashian, because she was a celebrity, and that would be more influential on someone like Donald Trump?
It's hard to access the White House. Yeah. And I had a source that was going over to the White House for meetings for prison reform, and I tried to get 2 people to, while you're there, could somebody please ask if there's any interest in clemency? No, I don't think there's any interest in that. So
that's what you were told.
Yeah. We have to stay focused. And we can't deviate. And so I was like, thank God Kim was not an expert, because her naivete, because so many people were making fun of Trump and Kim and why Kim, she's not an expert. Well, all the experts were saying, no, I don't think that Trump is, and he wasn't giving a signal. He was talking about the death penalty, but it never hurts to ask.
Yeah.
And it never hurts to float a case and say, but there's all these people that Obama left behind. Psychology is the key to anything. And I think if Trump can make Obama look bad, that's a dog whistle.
He'll do anything to make Obama look bad. Yeah, right.
So I was always like saying, however, Obama left all these pot lifers and women in. Can someone at least float that idea? Kim is the one who carried the football over the goal and made the touchdown.
And do you know if she actually said specifically to Trump, Obama has left all of these deserving people in?
I don't know. I could still get a message and ask, but
I'd love to find that.
I do know they already know now, though, because no sooner did he grant her clemency, literally, if it wasn't that day, it was the next day. Maybe it was the next day. I get a phone call from one of the people that are working with the White House administration on prison reform, and they said they want names. They want a list. And so I worked for several days compiling a list, and other organizations did too.
This is recently.
This was right after Alice got clemency.
Yeah. So a couple weeks ago. And did this list get to the White House? All right.
Yeah.
So earlier in the living room, you were telling me that Obama kind of has this legacy of having released more nonviolent drug offenders than anyone else. Yet you were saying there are so many more he could have released and so much more he could have done, especially with descheduling cannabis, and that he didn't do. And that you now have this hope or even expectation that Donald Trump is going to do perhaps even more than Obama did. Can you talk about that a bit?
I think that President Obama was well-intended and will never detract from the good that came of the Clemency Project 2014. 1,715 people received it. Some are still in prison.
Because they haven't just been released yet? It takes a while.
They haven't been released. They wanted them to do another year. Towards the tail end, they started saying, take the RDAP. And I really think the BOP started bickering because they get money for every single person that takes RDAP. And
what does that stand for?
The drug program, excuse me. It's a 500-hour drug program. It's not a bad idea, but like Tim Tyler, who was in for LSD, he had to stay and take the RDAP program. But there's other people who got it who aren't going to be released until, there's one guy we advocated for, and his sentence was reduced from life to 30, and he doesn't get out till 2034. So
he got clemency?
He got clemency.
He still isn't out
until 2034. We're petitioning Trump to go ahead and commute the rest of his sentence because he's perfect. He's a perfect candidate. And my vice president.
And who makes those decisions? I thought you get clemency, you have to be released in a reasonable. They listen to the
prosecutors. I'm certain that the prosecutors had a say in this. And there, towards the tail end, it just really started becoming a train wreck. And we're monitoring this. I wrote an open letter, and we had tons of organizations and clemency recipients sign it, where we asked the White House to do a reversal on several people who'd been denied, and we rang the bell, and I know it was, the White House saw it because Business Insider, Michelle Mark, called them to get a comment. They said they had read it, and that they stood by the decisions that they had made. They reached over to DOJ too for a comment, couldn't get a comment from them, but we compiled a list of first offender women serving, already served 20, like Alice Johnson. I highlighted her case. In fact, I just tweeted our open letter last night, and I took out that excerpt where we referenced Alice Johnson in it. And they were committed to allowing DOJ to be in full control. So now, Obama may go down in history as giving the most clemencies in his second term, but guess what? Trump can actually trump that because very few presidents grant clemency and do pardons in the first few years. So very quickly, he can claim the most generous spot if he does, say, quite a few in his second year.
Do you think he will?
Yes. I think, yeah.
You have information that he's planning to?
I think they're looking at a process there, and they're getting they're putting things into place.
What do you think liberal people are going to think or feel about the fact that a conservative Republican White House is releasing more nonviolent drug offenders than Obama did?
In his
first
term, yeah. Well, because I don't know what Trump's going to do, so that's still a question mark. But certainly in his first term, because Obama didn't do any in his first term. I think there may have been one, but I don't think he did. I don't think he did any. And so that's wide open now to take that historic spot as the president who did the most in their first term.
I believe it might happen. I have always adopted as an activist principle that you have to see your perceived enemies as potential allies. And too often, activists don't do that. No. They, even with mothers who have lost children, I remember in the early days of Dance Safe, every time I heard about fake ecstasy death, because remember back then, very, very few people were dying from actual MDMA. Mm-hmm. But so I'd always reach out to parents and say, hey, would you like to support us? How can we support you? Let's get harm reduction accepted to prevent these tragedies. And many people had just assumed that, that someone whose child died from taking illegal drugs is going to automatically be against the drugs. And I found that absolutely not to be the case across the board. They were more willing. And I think in the same way, if we assume that Republicans or conservatives are not going to support the issue of drug policy reform, we're never going to find out that we're wrong. And what I have found is that they are equally as likely. You have a certain set of hardcore conservatives. I think it's the more religious fundamentalist types that believe drug use is a sin and they don't want to, but most Republicans are not of that type. Being conservative doesn't mean you're against justice. And so it's not surprising to me, would not be if we see a Republican administration do more for drug policy reform, despite Jeff Sessions. Especially because Trump doesn't like Jeff Sessions now, right?
Yeah, so, this is a way to really goad him. Well, a couple of things. I think mothers or anybody who's lost a child is probably all the more angrier when they find out the truth. Right. And when they find out that their child could have been saved if there had been information disseminated so that there was Dance Safe, then you've got an activist who is invested in doing the right thing because they don't want any other mother to lose their child. But with regard to conservatism, it seems to me like when they find out that a kingpin went free, I have a case where the murderer was given full immunity, never served a day. Wow. I have found them to be the most offended because they have this core belief that our justice system works the way it should, and that it puts bad people away. And when you really start explaining the plea bargain process and who actually ends up, which is the low-hanging fruit, in prison with long sentences, and that they'll give deals like they did to my ex-husband, and who received 3 years probation from the same judge that gave me 24 years based on the ecstasy he manufactured. Then again, kind of like the mother that's lost a child, the light bulb goes on and they're almost more offended and in disbelief. But when you can show the facts and that this is really happening. So I think that that's kind of going to be the evolution, because I don't think Trump knew. I don't think he knows about the conspiracy law. I don't think he understands these cases. I don't think anybody really sat him down and explained the way the drug war carnage prosecutes cases and puts the low-hanging fruit in prison. But I do know that now that he's in the target of a probe, and he's witnessing the squeezing and plea bargains
of the people around him
that are being put in a vice to force them to talk in order to go up the chain. I think that the whole DOJ process is now they're revealing how they prosecute cases to the very person
that can grant clemency.
Chickens come home to roost, and you got to be careful who you decide to target.
Fascinating.
Because this is a man who, does have the ability to maybe correct some of the carnage that's going on over at DOJ.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. I understand how, focusing on the most egregious cases can appeal to the broadest segment of the population. But it seems like you are also, just like DanceSafe, trying to save one life at a time, putting Band-Aids on a system that continues to put people in prison. Does CANDO work on issues of systemic change to drug laws?
Well, my mission statement is to educate the public about the conspiracy law. That was kind of like first prong. And second prong was identify victims of the conspiracy law, especially nonviolent drug offenders, which is really, that's part of our acronym, and advocate justice through clemency for them. So there's a lot of organizations that are trying to change the laws, and I think it's important, to pick a lane, and that's my lane. However, First Step Act is Jared Kushner's prison reform bill that he wants. I went to the White House for that. So yes, I do put a foot in those lanes when there's legislation that I feel will be very beneficial to the people that I'm helping, who I already communicate with. I'm one of the few organizations that actually communicates one-on-one with my prisoners. So I know them, I know their cases, I know their family members, I know their details. It's other organizations that get millions of dollars for some reason say it's cost prohibitive and they can't do it. Well, I don't know, I'm doing it. And so I feed them cases of people who will benefit if First Step Act passes. And then they're pushing those out through social media, because we had some people who were normally our allies who were saying they didn't want this legislation to pass.
Why is that?
I think some of our allies are more politically motivated than, and some, I was sad to see.
You mean it's because the Republicans or Jared Kushner is supporting
seems to
it?
me. I mean, it seems to me.
Yeah.
And that goes back to your point about, I don't care who's in the White House, and I don't get money from donors that can pull my strings and control me. And so I was shocked almost when I saw some of the lies being told about the First Step Act. It was called sham legislation.
Give us the gist of the First Step Act.
The First Step Act, I get it. Some people said, we want sentencing reform. This doesn't have sentencing reform. Well, I've never seen a bill that covered everything anyway and was perfect. So the naysayers are saying it doesn't have enough. We want sentencing reform. I get it. Okay, sentencing reform is, Grassley has a bill, and they want some elements. Well, if we support this, once it gets to the Senate, that's where the horse trading begins anyway. And Grassley has already put his foot down. It probably will. In fact, I've just recently learned that some sentencing reform is going to be injected into this prison reform bill.
What does it do?
But the prison reform bill, it's got a laundry list of wonderful things. Some things that nobody has ever even suggested, like before you leave prison, they have to get you a valid ID, something that is recognized as a valid ID. And we have horror stories where people have gotten out. They were born in a military hospital in Vietnam. They're a citizen, but they can't get a job because they're still trying to get valid ID and find their paperwork. We have people serving 30 years that they will get out this year instead of next year or whatever if this passes. In fact, they'll get an immediate release. I think they said about 4,000 people will get an immediate release if this passes. And for people who say, well, doesn't matter, seeing your mother, your father before they pass away,
sure,
being at a graduation, being at your daughter's wedding, every day matters. Those are milestones.
Of course.
And it was disgusting to me to see the movement by some of the people on the left to try to tank this legislation and kill it early on. I think it was because Jared Kushner is for it.
Why do you think Kushner's taken interest in this? How did he
His father went to prison. Once you're touched by this personally, that's where I think we all now are benefiting, because there's very few people in this country who doesn't know somebody who's gone to prison during the era of mass incarceration.
Absolutely right.
Everyone knows an uncle, a son, a friend. Yeah. Everybody knows somebody. So that evolution is occurring.
It's like the advances we're seeing now in naloxone and other opiate harm reduction. It's almost like everybody knows someone who's died, or someone who knows someone who's died from an overdose.
Right.
And that's causing more and more people to say, hey, wake up, we have to do something different.
And how sad, because cannabis was a wonderful way to treat pain, that those people might be alive today if we didn't still have the mentality that marijuana belongs in Schedule I.
Right, and MDMA is extraordinarily useful for treating post-traumatic stress disorder, which is also highly correlated with addiction. So
right. Anyway, so the First Step Act also, you can earn 10 good days per 30. So for every month that you're serving going forward, you can knock off 10 good days.
Oh, wow, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's a third of your sentence.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
But I think, given the fact that so many people said nothing would happen under the Trump administration, what I see happening is that every time that ceiling is shattered, there's criticism like, well, yeah, but it's not enough. So now that there is prison reform, now that the White House has said that they would sign it, a lot of people are criticizing that, it's not enough.
My wife was telling me the other day, she listens to a lot of podcasts, and she was listening to a podcast where they were talking about the possibility that Donald Trump might reschedule cannabis to Schedule II. And the question on this liberal podcast that they were debating is, do you want that to happen? Because if it does, it might get Donald Trump reelected. And people are actually struggling with answering this question. This thing you call politics, the two-party system and the loyalties and team mentality that people have, infects not just prosecutors and people in Washington, but the entire country. It's insane. And it's one reason I think more people need to go through MDMA therapy, or somehow increase their ability to empathize with those that they perceive to be their enemies, because these divisions are largely artificial between us. And if we just try to understand those who are different from us, we might end up improving society in ways that everybody agrees with.
When we went to the White House, Van Jones and Topeka Sam, we all went in there. Ivanka Trump is sitting on the front row with Sessions. This never happened during the Obama administration. We went to the White House and we were always over at the Eisenhower building. Obama was never there. Holder never was there. And we were escorted over to the White House. We went into the big reception room. And so everybody was there. Trump came in, gave a speech. Mike Pence spoke before him. And then there was a panel with former Governor Rick Perry of Texas, and Van Jones, Jared, my colleague Topeka Sam, and Jessica Jackson Sloan. And Jeff Sessions, I think for the first time in his life, had to sit there and listen to what Topeka Sam had to say. Topeka Sam is a formerly incarcerated woman, and she was talking about what it's like in prison and how you can't even get sanitary napkins and how the guards treat you. And she's talking about, something in a passionate way. And I'm sitting there looking over at Sessions, having to listen to a formerly incarcerated person. And it was so gratifying. We were vilified. So just like you're saying, you cannot believe the attacks that Van Jones got on social media. They're calling him, you were calling him a traitor. Somebody even put up some kind of like a...
Just because he attended the...
Because we went in there. Yeah. So I learned the hard way that many, many people that I thought were our allies, I'm friends with the heads of these organizations. And I suddenly realized, oh no, you're a political activist. Yeah. And I thought you were like a prison reform, prisoner advocate. And it really allowed you to see like, oh, okay, I'm getting a real education here.
It's really ironic because I had mentioned to you earlier about before the interview, I had the opportunity to meet with Obama's Office of National Drug Control Policy, the drug czar's office, even though they're not using the drug czar term anymore, with Dee Dee Goldsmith, who lost her daughter of heat stroke after taking MDMA in a hot nightclub in DC. And they were very, very friendly, seemingly supportive to us, but didn't really do anything at all to help us. In fact, in the meeting, they said to us, we were trying to amend the RAVE Act or get some clarification on how the RAVE Act should be enforced to free promoters, festival promoters and club owners from fear of implementing harm reduction services at their events. And they said to us, oh, of course we support you, but please don't tell anyone that we support you. We'll be better able to support you if you don't go public with that. And of course, then they didn't do anything.
There's something wrong with that whole paradigm because, number one, you're a public servant. And if that's your position, and it's really a safe position for the Obama administration. You're a Democrat.
It's extremely safe, right?
Your base gets it.
Yeah.
Why in the world there wasn't any spine with regard to really making radical change and going down in history as the first African-American president, Democrat, who could literally change many things that would have had, like you're talking about, a systemic impact on this country.
Right.
Holder didn't even put out that memo to rein in mandatory minimums a little bit.
So what do you think's going on
until
there?
He was literally he was leaving. So
yes.
He did that like months before he left.
And so there's a cliche that only the Republicans or the Conservative Party can get away with doing more liberal things because they have maybe less to lose by doing so, right? That's why Trump could go and meet with Kim Jong-un and make overtures towards the peace process between North and South Korea. But if a Democrat tried to do that, they would get attacked by the Republicans for being too soft or something like that. The irony is very strange to me. And again, all I can think is it has to do with the perversion of our two-party political system where neither side's willing to support good policy if it's perceived as coming from the other party.
Right.
It's really a defect in our democracy.
It's definitely a defect. It's and it's one that I just hope that people who are committed to a cause can calibrate and remember what the cause is. And I don't care who signs the legislation. I was impacted. I was in prison. These folks are in there and they need the people, those of us, to be their voice and to also, I think, represent them in their best interest. And believe you me, the majority of the prisoners want this particular legislation to pass. And now I think Trump understands this issue at least a little bit better with Alice's case. Right. And now we're being invited in with these lists and there's an evolution going on. I think that because we're now sort of educating, and now that Alice was released and there was a lot of positive feedback, and isn't this a great story? I've been waiting for the media to try to spin it. And for a while they were bashing Kim Kardashian, bashing, kind of trying to spin. Anderson Cooper asked Van Jones, well, what about the thousands of people who don't have a celebrity? If I were in that position and a reporter who has a program every night on CNN, I would have thrown that back to Anderson, and I would have said, we have a long list. Are you willing to prop them up?
Release them too. Release them too.
You're a journalist. Right now, this moment, will you look at the case of somebody like Alice and put them on your show? So don't ask that question if you too aren't interested in the thousands of prisoners who don't have a celebrity, because journalists aren't doing their job. They're not lifting these cases up. Very few people are calling me saying, we want a story like Alice's so that we can put it on TV and show the public. I've had a few offers from some production companies that are interested in Clemency now and are like, oh, well, maybe there's something here. But don't criticize Kim Kardashian or the fact that Trump did this because of Kim Kardashian, simply because, well, what about the thousands who don't have a celeb? What about them? Let's get them out too.
Right.
Let's all get on board,
right,
including the people asking the question, and let's prop up these other people. I have a big list on the CANDO Foundation website.
Yep.
Do you care about them? Or are you just spinning it?
In all of my activism, I've always maintained that I don't care who's in office. That's why I spend a lot more of my time and energy in issue-oriented activism and pressuring, whichever political parties in office than I do engaging in electoral politics, because I think that we're more effective that way if we want to end the drug war. And I tell people all the time, the worst thing that could happen is if drug policy reform became a partisan issue, because then it will get locked forever in a roadblock. So I encourage everyone out there who believes in drug policy reform to reach out to the other side, and you might find out they're not really your enemies.
We really can make progress if we stop perceiving the enemy as being somebody who cannot be converted. Right. And for the people who were criticizing us because we went to the White House, my response every time was like, I can't educate my fellow activists. We've got to go out of our echo chamber. Yeah. There's too often for conferences and everything, we're talking to one another, and I can't explain to another formerly incarcerated person what it feels like to be in prison. Yet we come together, and I hear, we have our own little conferences, and we're telling our stories, and we're in a bubble.
Right.
We're just confirming to one another. Yeah. You can't really make progress until you start talking to people who don't understand this issue. So get out of the echo chamber, and let's start making progress.
Right. Well, it's been great talking with you. Thank you for what you do. We'll keep working to end this drug war, one person at a time. I do want to say, I think your focus on individuals and the emotional side, it brings out the emotional side of it.
You have to put a face on anything,
right?
And a story and the emotional cord. I remember, I'll never forget the first time I was reading an article, and I was like, "What? I didn't know they're having raves, and I'm in here."
Would you have been a raver?
Yes.
Yeah, you probably would have.
I was a dancing maniac. And I was just like, this sucks, because now they're talking about it like, oh, they're having a big party and people are doing MDMA raves.
We'll take you to a festival next year.
Okay.
Lightning in a Bottle is just maybe a couple hours in California from here, which is a great music festival with eclectic mix of different types of music, and my wife and I love to go to that one. So.